All right, so I think it is time for us to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon to discuss plugging the leaks, identifying best practices in developing and advancing women in academic emergency medicine. And really just want to start by acknowledging that there's a tremendous amount of diversity in ways to talk about, and we're really going to focus on women today, but also recognizing the intersectionality piece of this further into our discussion. Dr. Diercks has the disclosures as noted here, nothing that will impact today's discussion. The remainder of us aspire to disclosures throughout our careers. By the end of the session, what we're really hoping is that we'll discuss leadership roles in academic emergency medicine and really paths to achieving these roles. To discuss best practices for mentoring women in academic emergency medicine and supporting them in that leadership development, and then to discuss the impact of departmental and institutional culture on gender inequities in compensation and promotion. And so with that, I have the pleasure of introducing my esteemed panelist, Dr. Deborah Diercks, who is the Chair and Professor of Emergency Medicine at UT Southwestern Medical Center. And in just a moment, as we begin the panel, I'm going to let them give a little more information about themselves. Dr. Nancy Kwon, who is the Vice Chair of Emergency Medicine at the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra. Dr. Cassandra Bradby, who is the Residency Program Director and the Vice Chair of Diversity and Inclusion at Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina University. I'm Luan Lawson. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education and Student Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. And Dr. Kathy Hiller, who is the Associate Dean and Regional Director at IU School of Medicine in Bloomington and the Chief Academic Officer for the IU Health South Central Region. And Dr. Leigh Patterson, who is the Chair of Emergency Medicine at Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina University. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to start with just a little tidbit about emergency medicine and really talk about women in academic medicine. So as we look at this representation, this information came out in 2020, but the data actually reflects a little further back to 2018 to 2019. And so what we see is there's been a tremendous increase in the number of medical school applicants who are female. Actually, if we look at the data from 2022, 2023, women actually consisted of 57% of all medical school applicants and 56% of matriculants. But I think one of our real challenges here is as we move further down the pipeline of leadership positions, there are fewer and fewer women who are in these positions throughout the way. And this isn't accounted for just by the increase in sort of student numbers, because if so, we would already be seeing those increases translated in the number of deans and the number of department chairs and at least assistant and associate dean levels. And we're not yet beginning to see those. But I do think that it's a tremendous amount of hope for us, for those of us who may be trained a little earlier in our careers, that certainly the number of women within the medical field have increased, and those changes have been pretty dramatic. If we look at women by faculty by rank, that females tend to stay at the instructor level much longer, and there are fewer of them at the full professor level compared to their colleagues. Pretty stagnant numbers of women department chairs. So thrilled to have several of them with us today to discuss some of this, because this really actually, I think, begins to show if it were just a matter of increasing sort of women going to medical school, we would see increases in these numbers, but the numbers have remained flat over time. And emergency medicine doesn't really do the best at this. Emergency medicine has 11% women chairs by department compared to some other specialties where they're actually doing much better. So we really do have an opportunity to improve this and think about leadership differently. And the interesting thing is, if you look at women in emergency medicine, women are actually more likely to have more funding, more subspecialty training, more leadership positions at the national level compared to their male counterparts, and yet there's a lag in these leadership positions. This is a fascinating article that I would encourage folks to take a look at, and this is gender differences and experiences of leadership among emergency medicine department chairs. And if you look at this, this article, it really describes the differences in men and women's perceptions when they did qualitative interviews. Men were more typically to describe leadership as their destiny, as opposed to something that women described that this is something they had prepared for along the way. Men more likely also to say that they were moving into these positions and really desire to do this as a way to gain influence. Men were more likely to be dismissive of the risk associated with actually being a department chair, and they were also more likely to be sponsored by male colleagues and sponsors and other leaders. Whereas if you talk to the female chairs, actually describe this as they were really motivated to make a difference and wanted to make an impact, but were really incredibly cognizant of the potential downsides of being a chair on their careers. Especially when they're asked to step into the roles of taking over a department that had significant organizational culture issues or other issues that really took a time to change and really actually required something that was a major overhaul and really looking at that in a deeper effort. And women were also more likely to describe that they were more likely to have to rely on their own attempts to advance their career and didn't necessarily feel that they had the sponsorship of others along the way. And so again, when we look at this in terms of broadly, in terms of what are the positions and what gains have been made over time, for senior associate deans, these numbers again, pretty little change in terms of men significantly outnumbering the number of women in these positions. Actually looking at a better balance in the associate and assistant deans, but again, the numbers for women actually lag as well. Women are also more likely to report disrespect in their specialty that they perceive that is based on their gender over the past year, with emergency medicine actually being one of the top specialties that really reports experiencing this. None of this information is new to any of you all, I'm sure, but there's also gender disparities in compensation. I will say that the one place that we're a little closer is on the education realm, that it is more common, I think, to find women in educational leadership roles. But when you look at executive leadership or compensation, there's actually a larger gap and a larger disparity there. But that is not to say that we are without hope, because I do think that all of us feel that there have been tremendous strides made, and really it's an opportunity to discuss what are the opportunities here, and also really appreciate allies in the discussion and joining us today to really think about how do we support one another and our peers as well. And so with that, we're going to move to our panel discussion. I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, to describe their current positions, and tell us a little bit about your experience and your path. Dr. Bradby, would you like to start?
So my name is Cassandra Bradby. I'm the residency program director at ECU Health Medical Center in Greenville, North Carolina. So my path to being the program director, I was the education chief when I was a resident. I've always enjoyed education. I did tutoring when I was in medical school, which is where this whole thing started. And then I stayed on an educational pathway. Like after that, it was really fun to be an APD after being the education chief, because I was like, oh, I know how to do this already. Oh, you want me to make a schedule? I've done that. Oh, you need me to create this lesson? I've done that. Oh, I need to do this STEM thing? I've done that. Okay, cool. So being an APD, that was awesome. I know how to be number 2 in charge. I know how to tell you, like, this is what I'm capable of. This one's not so much in my wheelhouse. But when I became the program director, I had a whole new set of challenges that I didn't actually really know what to do with. So there is legal problems that no one quite tells you about, because those are confidential, so those don't get talked about a whole lot. And then there's administrative problems, which is a little bit different than the legal problems. And then I quickly figured out that I am no longer an educator. I am an administrator. And I'm not sure I understood that when I became the program director. And so a lot of what I do is paperwork, keeping the train on the tracks, making sure that everybody, right now it feels like I'm making sure that everybody is fed. I'm making sure that they show up for work on time, all that kind of stuff. And so I don't know if I was quite prepared for some of those things, but I do think that it's given me a lot of willingness to reach out to other people for help and to ask for that support, and how do I do this and how do I do that and how do I get money for stuff was another thing that I don't think they quite taught us in like leadership school, which I would love to hear what the chairs have to say about that, because their definition of how to get money for stuff is very different than mine. But I do think that I was well prepared to do most of the things that I do, other than maybe some of those smaller administrative tasks and the legal things that nobody taught me about.
Hi, my name is Nancy Kwon. Thank you so much for being here. I'm the Vice Chair of Emergency Medicine at Long Island Jewish Medical Center, which is part of Northwell Health. And I see a lot of familiar faces, so it's really great to see you, and some new faces. So my pathways, I did residency at Bellevue, NYU. So I see my colleague, my former colleague, Dr. Hamilton here. So thank you for being here. I had a wonderful experience there. You know, I think it was a different time and age, and residents really sometimes, did a lot on their own. And we had great mentors like Dr. Hamilton. It was a different time era, and I think I really enjoyed my time there. Dr. Goldfrank was a huge supporter of me. I think, I kind of chugged along, was interested in administration, did get a master's in public administration as soon as I graduated from residency. So I worked full-time as an attending, and then part-time went to NYU and got my master's in public administration, hoping to be able to apply it someday. As time went along, I kept on asking, I'd like to get more involved. I'd like to, do something in administration. So those opportunities weren't really given to me. And I was happy there. I could have stayed there. We had great colleagues. I could have stayed there forever. But in 2013, one of my former residents, co-residents, who was 2 years below me, Sal Pardo, actually reached out to me at LIJ and was like, there's been some leadership changes. Would you be interested in coming to interview for an associate chair position here? So after kind of seeking out those opportunities trying to, right, at NYU Bellevue, and the culture was we had a very, supportive environment in a lot of ways, but I think maybe the culture at that time wasn't sort of like the promotion of women. I had this opportunity placed in front of me here by a friend, and a former co-resident, and I came to check it out. It took me a few times to get the feel of the place, and then, I just fell in love with it. And I didn't have the operations experience from NYU Bellevue, but I felt like I could do it. I had the master's in public administration, and once given the opportunity, I think it was a very fast learning curve. Have really appreciated my time at Northwell, because I think they really invest in people, and there's a lot of allyship in order to promote women, to promote people who are underrepresented. I think, every day there's challenges. I know, just based on data, as a woman, you're not perceived the same way as a leader as a man is, and that's not based on anecdote. It is based on anecdotes, but it's based on data as well. So in 2019, I got promoted to vice chair for our department. 2018, I think it was actually. But kind of the things I heard from our C-suite, the medical directors, were kind of like, oh, she's kind of quiet, So if you know me, I'm not quiet at all. So that kind of, attaches maybe stereotypes of Asians, Asian women to me. So, it's kind of a little bit the tip of the iceberg syndrome. Like, you have to know somebody, and sometimes people make assumptions based on how you look, and sometimes that's being a woman. I think the best you could do is put the data out there, have dialogues like this, conversations like this. So thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I know it's the middle of the afternoon. This is always when my blood sugar dips and I need something sweet to eat. So I appreciate you all being here. Kathy Hiller. My journey to where I am today began in my very first faculty role. I was within a few weeks of starting asked to step in as the clerkship director. I was hired into a role as core faculty for the residency at the time. And it was a small faculty. I was actually number 13 and only the second woman on the faculty. I was very happy to take the clerkship director role. I enjoyed teaching, and I thought that was always going to be a part of my career. Very quickly, the department expanded to 2 and then 3 times its size. My clerkship director role afforded me the opportunity to meet some of the amazing national leaders here today, but also at the CORD conference and in the CDEM track. Quickly ingrained myself into that organization and really sunk into it and realized that those were my people. That allowed me the opportunity to take some leadership roles in national professional organizations, which then translated to being able to bring back lessons learned at these national organizations to my home department. They created a director of undergraduate education role for me, which was probably more accurately describing the work that I was actually doing. And I was happy in that position for about almost a decade, actually. And then I sort of realized I was outgrowing it, but there was no place for me to go. I like to, when I have students or residents or junior faculty in this position in front of me that I'm helping to mentor through, there's actually a wonderful YouTube video. If you Google lobster and rabbi, you'll get it. And he talks about how lobsters, when they molt and grow out of these very firm, hard shells, the impetus for that molting is them being uncomfortable. And I recognize that that's where I was at. So I wasn't aggressively looking for anything else, but I did sort of casually start to look, and someone had heard that I was sort of casually looking and forwarded me the opportunity that I'm actually in now. And I thought to myself, and this might be a very female-centric view, there's no way I'm qualified for that. It was literally 2 steps up. And the person who forwarded it to me said, just apply, what do you know? And so I just applied, and they offered me an interview, and I'm like, well, I'll just go. I mean, I'm not moving to Indiana, whatever. And I went, and about halfway through the first day of the interview, I kind of went, oh my God, this might actually be my next job. And I got home, and I told my husband, what do you think about Indiana? And here we are. And I will say it has been a steep growth curve for me. So much like Dr. Bradby, there were lots of things. I have 2 PhD programs and a full undergraduate portfolio, $3 million research portfolio. I didn't do any of this as the director for undergraduate education where I came from. I'm still learning a lot. But I do think being a woman in that space has been helpful because I think we're perceived as more collaborative, and that's been a huge help for me learning the systems and learning how to navigate them. So I'll stop there.
You know, it's funny, I'm sitting here and trying to kind of look for some commonality in everybody, and I don't think what these women are saying is how engaged they are. Like, I've been personally on committees and worked with almost everyone on this panel on kind of different things and different work within SAEM, and they're just amazing, right? So, and the key thing, you know, especially most recently with Cassandra and Nancy, is they actually get their crap done, right? And they get it done, like, by the deadline. And you never have to worry whether they're gonna get it done. And I think that's just one of the common kind of things about the women who are on this panel, and everything they do is they're engaged, they contribute, they're reliable. You know, they're people that, you know, people go to because they know they'll actually do things. And I think that's just kind of something that they aren't saying, because, and I could say because I've worked with them, so I know they always get it done. And that's just, it is, I'd love to say that everyone I work with all the time gets their stuff done. It's not the case, right? And these guys are just really unique and given leadership positions, I think, because of how engaged and how reliable they've been throughout their career, which I think is really important. I think he also heard a lot about not thinking you can do the job. That is, something in women, and kind of to build on Cherry's study. There's this term now that's called second generation bias, and they use it in that paper to say, look, we've gotten to the point where there are female chairs, right, and there are females in leaders. Now the bias is, do they keep giving the women the crap jobs, right? So come into this, you can do it. It's really all messed up, but you can do it, right? And so that fear or that concern that second generation bias is giving women jobs that are just extremely difficult to do well and to succeed in. And I think that's what you've seen a little bit in the female chairs. I think that female chairs in emergency medicine, their tenure is much shorter than the men. Since I've been a chair, we've lost 3 outstanding women as chairs for various reasons. And, you always, it's always in that back of your mind a little bit, is that, what are they being expected to, or what my task is? And I think that's something that, that is one of the concerns out there, and it's kind of already been alluded to. Are you giving those kind of very difficult put in difficult situations because you can? And then I guess the third thing is everyone's kind of talked about relationships. And I know for me, I didn't know anybody in Dallas. I knew a couple of people in Dallas, but relationships have been really, really helpful to success. And that's relationships to people I work with, to the relationships to the chairs, to the relationships up above, of people that can have your back, can kind of pre-meet before the meeting. And there's a great book called Power and Influence. I'm not a big, let's read every leadership book, because there's something called Blinkist that gives you summaries in 15 minutes, and that I'll do. But but Power and Influence is all about how to have an impact, and it's all built on the relationships you can share, and that trust, and kind of how those being there, being present, listening, and how much influence you have by just having those relationships. And I think it's a really, really good book for women to read, because it will resonate with how you feel that you best and are most comfortable in situations. So.
All right. Hi, my name is Leigh Patterson. As Luan said, I'm the chair of emergency medicine at ECU. I think one of the things I would talk about that might be unique a little bit in my own journey is that mine is the story of interim roles. In 16 years, in the 16, 17 years I've worked at my current institution, I've had 4 interim roles, and I've also had some counseling about maybe that's not a good thing, and that's fine, but it can be. It really can be. So my journey began a lot in education, very, very similar to Cassie's. I came to my institution with the long-range goal of, I want to be a program director. I'm going to be an assistant program director. I'm going to be here for 5 years, and then when I'm ready, that's a woman thing, right? When I'm ready, I'm going to apply for a PD job. And 12 months into my job, my PD said, I'm done, I'm tapping out. Have a good time. And I was the interim for a year. And originally wasn't sure if I would do it. My chair at the time said, I think you might want to think about not doing this. Give yourself a little more time. And that was really good advice that I didn't take then. I didn't. I had the job for a year. I said, these are my kids. I don't like these other applicants. They can't take my children. It's a little maternal, very much a woman thing to do too. And I applied for the job. And I think like Kathy, I was really happy in that for about 10 years. I too went back to school, got a master's degree, said this is where I'm going. When I was done being a program director, I moved into the dean's office, again in an interim role in faculty development. My boss over there wanted to regrow that work after it had been slashed in previous budget cuts, and had this grand idea of, oh, I can make an interim half an FTE, I can take it, I can do this right now, we'll get around to getting you the permanent position. So I was stepped into that role as an interim, and about 2 years later, I became the permanent position there. I applied for it and was accepted that role, and I thought, this is going to be my next 10-year job. This is great. I love this. I'm doing this. This is wonderful. And in part of that work, I ended up being the interim chair in a department not in our specialty, actually in pathology, which is sometimes on the other end of the spectrum. It was a wonderful, wonderful educational experience for me, and a deep dive into leadership. And I had that very female leader thought of, oh, I'm not qualified to be a chair, this is my chance. Let me go do this for a year. It'll really help me be a faculty development dean when I go back to this. I'll see things from the chair's side and the faculty side. And that was true. It was very, very helpful. What was also, I think, a common experience for women leaders is that's the first time I saw a budget. That is the first time anyone handed me a budget, the budget, with multiple $1 million on it and looking at what personnel cost were. It's the first time I handled that kind of information. And it was really great because no one was expecting me to succeed at it. I had very little pressure. I had a wonderful, what we call in our system CATOs, which is a finance manager, who was very gracious and sat down and gave me really an incredible finance education looking at that. I still was headed back to faculty development, but my chair in my home department accepted a wonderful position elsewhere. And we really didn't have a good bench. We had a little bit of a tense situation in the department, and my dean deployed me to interim chair that department too. Much like you said, looking at sending you in to fix the things women are good at fixing, I was later really explained to me that I was deployed to repair a relationship with our hospital. And to sort of correct and preserve some things there. I thought, okay, all right, here we go. We can do this, and then we'll step out of it. And I think for me, taking those two roles was the first time I realized I could do something other than what I thought I wanted to do, and how important it was for women to take chair roles, particularly in my home institution where Cassie and I work. We don't have very many of us in that space. And I ended up falling in love with that role too, and it was the last role I thought I was going to take. I told my boss very early on as the PD, okay, I'm gonna do this, I'm really gonna do this, but I'm never gonna do your job. And you don't know where that's gonna take you, but I love talking about interim roles and kind of how we did that, but I think that's, I don't think I'm the only woman who's taken interim roles and ended up in that space, but I might have had a few more than others.
I think just to normalize, usually the interims don't in a lot of places, so it is a risk. So when you hear about all these kind of interims, just because usually those are the pluggers while they wait for that somebody else, and so it's worse to either do really well as an interim, or you do okay, and if you do okay, they're going to want highly likely that they may try to get someone else. So it's just not a job that a lot of people will say.
Talk about that later. I
Yes,
don't think
we
that's
can
the whole target of this, but I'll be honest with you. At one point, I told my dean, okay, when I'm finished with this, I would like the permanent position as the interim. I would actually like to see us create this position where we intentionally deploy the external interim on purpose to do this and step into this department each time we have a rotation to get ready for that next person and not do that. But I do think the interim can be a great way to see if you like it or not.
Yes.
Because again, I was not looking for this job. I wasn't. I'm so glad I ended up there, but I wasn't looking for this job, and I never would have found it otherwise. I mean, in my own department, working with people, I really encourage people, let's take this on, and it's not permanent. You don't have to own it. Let's try it for 6 months and see, and if you don't like it, you can give it back. That's probably a little different than the interims I took, but my own experience has kind of colored that.
And I think I probably have very many similar experiences in this, probably a little different that I actually started out in a community emergency medicine setting, went back to my hometown. I thought I was going to get back to the people who took care of me. And about 4 years later, I was miserable with it. And so when I went back to academic emergency medicine, I told the chair, I want nothing to do with teaching, I don't want anything to do with research or administration. And I would really describe my career as a series of field promotions, really starting more formally with the role of clerkship director. To put the plug in for clerkship directors in emergency medicine, it's really a misnomer because it's not just clerkship directors. It's really meant for everyone who is educating in the UME space. So it is a wonderful networking opportunity and really where I developed some of my closest sort of peers, colleagues, support groups, therapy groups all along the way. And so I quickly figured out that I was not qualified for the job of being a clerkship director, went back and got my master's degree and sort of did all of the usual things. We tend to be problem solvers, and so I was really good at being, and just was asked to do more and more because I did things, I got them done, people then ask you to do more things. And so I think that was really helpful. But I think, I think when we talk about like sponsors and allies, I had in my head this like magical moment of somebody's doing all this stuff for you. I will tell you, there really two comments that were probably pivotal in my career. One was I was doing my like annual evaluation with my chair, and at some point in time I was talking about some lower level sort of leadership roles, and he's like, "Why would you settle for that?" And I was like, "Because I'm not qualified for anything else, right?" And he's like, "No, you could be these things one day, and you need to set your sights on that." And it really planted the seed for me in ways in which I never really imagined. And it was like one simple statement. It wasn't like a huge sort of opening pass. And for me, really in the midst of COVID, I was an associate dean on the curricular side. I really was tapped to, there had been a leadership change at the institutional level with multiple positions. And what I really found myself was doing my boss's job, for lack of better words. And it really, I was like, I can do this, right? I didn't really think I would be working with supply chain management. That was not in the curricular dean role when I originally took it. And so in that thinking about, could I do something else, I tossed out sort of and applied for a job. And I did not take the initial job. My husband is an internist and has been at the same practice for like nearly 25 years. And but the dean who interviewed me when he offered the job and I declined it, who was just wonderful, he said, "Well, if this might not be the right job for you, but you need to find a job like this that's right for you because you have the ability and skill set to do it," which to me was really, I think, dramatic that somebody who was in that position, it's literally, again, one sentence from somebody I've never spoken to again, but really, I think, helped me have the confidence to go forward and think about moving on to the next role. And so that really, I think, was an impetus for me to really actually take the next job after having been at an institution for a really long time. So we have lots of prepared questions, but I think at this point, what I might do is turn it over to the audience and see if you all have questions so that we're able to meet your needs first, and then we can go back to some of our own if you don't. Question. Did you have a question? You look like you had a question.
Associate or assistant to associate professor. That's our biggest kind of female loss. And I think part of it is you can look at kind of inherent biases that may exist in the system. There's a lot of things that happen in the first year, 6 to 8 years out. Family, kind of life happens, and priorities may be different. And it's a hard time to give you grace for not living up to your colleagues, right? So I had a 3-month-old when I started my first academic job, and my second, Kirst came around 21 months after, that. And so my first 6 years, 8 years of my career were balancing 2 kiddos, right? And trying to work and, switch to night shifts only so I could at least try to kind of have some semblance of a family life and be there when I thought they needed to be there. And it was humbling to have male faculty who started exactly when I did have very different paths. They didn't have kids. I know I laughed like crazy when they had kids way later, and mine were older. That was great. But during that time, I was like, I'm like trying to do research, and I've got somebody who literally, finished a year, but we graduated med school at the same time, totally my best friend, and he's going, his trajectory is going, skyrocketing, and I'm like trying to write a paper while I'm changing diapers. And it just is, that time period is really hard. I know I had a ton of self-doubt. Could I continue to do this? Is this really the right thing? Am I just making my life harder? And so those are those times where I had some really great friends I met through SAEM and even in my family that just said, just validated that you just keep going, you're doing fine. And I think it is just, it's hard to explain how inherent turmoil you go through in that first 6 years out, especially as you're developing your family and trying to succeed. And the reality is the bar I know I set up for myself was really way up here. It probably didn't need to be way up there, but inherently, that's what I thought the bar should be like, and then that's what I had already tried to be. And so it just is, I think just having people around to validate that you're doing a good job, validate that yes, it is, that first 10 years out is tough. Validate that it never gets a lot easier. I know, your kids never leave you. Case in point, right here. But I think it's just that whole giving yourself some grace, because it just doesn't go the way you picture it when you start a job without kids. It just doesn't.
I'll have to add that.
Okay, thanks. I have a quiet voice, so I will make sure to use a microphone. Your question was, why are women leaving, and are there any solutions? I'm going to editorialize the second half. So I will say, I mentioned that I sort of got my start in academic medicine in a professional organization, so CDEM. And I will tell you that for me, that was incredibly energizing. That was the thing that I looked forward to every spring. And I think that it was helpful as well because we talk about sponsorship and mentorship, but there was a lot of peer mentorship that happened. And that was, I think, a way for a lot of us to help each other without maybe necessarily having that one mentor that is the person who's supposed to lift you up. We kind of did it for each other, and it was energizing and promoted longevity and wellness and all of the things that make a job sticky. So even though I wasn't actually getting those things where my feet were planted, I knew where I could go to get them and frequently went there to get those things. And even now, while there's a lot happening where I'm at, I find that the peer mentorship piece is the thing that allows me to keep going and think about the next stages and also really think about the problems that I want to solve, because that's kind of where it all ends up. Like, what are the problems that you want to work on that you can make a positive contribution to? And then how do the people who you surround yourself help you in that? That's kind of my take.
Yeah, I think that, the question that you pose is a wonderful question. I think, the answers, the reasons for women leaving are multifactorial. I like to look at data, and I think one of the things that, I think we all probably know is that despite many more women being in the workforce, if you look at some of the social data, right, with women and men, and they're both working and maybe even making equal salaries, women are still doing more of the house, the caretaking, the household jobs, and then, I think sometimes when people are presented or kind of forced to answer like, well, why are women leaving? Sometimes there's like excuses, because they want to take time off to be, a homemaker or this, and I think that could be a reason, but I think there's many more complex reasons to it. I also think, when I look at myself, like, I think a lot of times, like, I know what the data shows, and I'm going to say something that's going to sound controversial, but it's based on data that, at times, men are harder on women in terms of evaluations and things like that, but at times, women are also harder on women, and, that's based on studies, looking at evaluations of faculty, looking at medical students and residents, and vice versa, right? So if I give an example of in our own institution at LIJ, and my residents and faculty have heard this before, and my chair and residency director are very supportive of sharing this data. Sometimes you have to put this data out there, right? So recognition is part of it too. So in my own institution, 17 years of data for residency awards that happen. I think a lot of programs do that. Out of 17 years in our program, only one woman has won over 17 years for the Faculty Teacher of the Year Award. One resident has won for the Resident Teacher of the Year Award. And those just like a couple of the awards that were the most extreme. There's a lot of other awards that were extreme, but maybe not as extreme. So, I think I like to use data to look at some of these things. And I think the answer to that is a very complex answer. But, I think when I look at all the men in the audience, which we appreciate you being here, like that allyship is very important. And, I think the other thing is to be, like some of the other panelists mentioned, to be kinder to yourself. So I think knowing that data, sometimes I'm like, oh, I have to work harder and longer to prove myself. But, I think it's about working smarter, not harder. And to realize like you have other people that you can delegate to, and to call people out. At times you may need to call people out. There was a leader who kind of was giving me secretarial tasks and was like, oh, can you do this, this, and this, and send out this email and organize this, and like I called him out on it, and I think I felt better, in a respectful way. And then maybe there was a little education that went along with it, So maybe the 10 years ago person that I was wouldn't call somebody out, but I tend to call people out more now.
I think along with like recognition, it's not simply like getting the award. I think it's the little things that matter, and what makes people leave academic medicine is feeling underappreciated and undervalued, because everybody brings something to the table. The department does not work if someone is not there to see the patients. The department doesn't work if someone doesn't make the schedule, which, by the way, is quite possibly the most underappreciated job that has ever existed in emergency medicine. But I do think that like it helps when people recognize the things that you bring to the table that are not going to win awards, but they recognize that without what you bring, it's not gonna work. Because otherwise, like a lot of what we talk about in EM is being cogs in the wheel. We're all replaceable and all that kind of stuff. And if you feel that way, like why would you want to stay, right? So highlighting the things that you bring to the table and celebrating those things, I think, is very important.
Other questions? We'll start up here and then go back.
I'm curious, being in these positions of influence and authority and power, what policies do you think would be the most effective in maintaining women going throughout the promotion to, say, full professor? Whether it's maternity leave, whether it's parental leave to make sure men feel included, making it equal, or is it recruiting? Like, what do you find most effective?
It is, as the person who's going up for tenure next year, what is most helpful to me is knowing, like, one, what can you stop the clock for? How long can you stop the clock? How do you restart that? Who do you talk to about that? What are the things that are required in order to make the next step? And what are the things that are suggestions? Which I understand that as a Black and Asian woman in academic medicine, that nothing is a suggestion and everything is a requirement. I'm aware of that. But I do think that, like, when things are unclear and I don't know how to execute, so like if I don't know how to stop the clock, then I'm not going to do that, and now I'm going to be more pressured to get everything done. For those who don't understand what I'm saying, like tenure, you have to do it in a certain amount of time. You have to hit a certain list of requirements. Every institution, every department is different, but that clock keeps going, and it's only like 6 or 7 years depending on where you are. So if you have a child and you're out of the game for like a quarter of a year, you can actually pause the clock for an amount of time so that you get an extension on that, so that they don't non-renew you or non-renew your contract when you don't quite make the leap on time. But knowing what the rules are, I think, is probably the most helpful thing, and knowing them early, like right up front.
Do you find that men remember to tell you these things, or do you find that you have to ask women who've gone through it?
no one will remember to tell you anything, and you should ask all questions at all times.
So that's correct. That is 100% correct, and we should disclose, Cassie reports to me, so we've just done tenure meetings twice this spring. I would agree with her, yes. So the institution's always going to tell you that's you. It's up to you. You do that. Tenure is on the faculty member. But your question was, what could we do collectively? And collectively, we could do a lot of different things. One, we could have a really honest discussion about tenure altogether. If you haven't had a chance to see, the Group on Faculty Affairs is a subsection of the AAMC, and this is like a singular topic of discussion they have. Many new medical schools don't have tenure, but do you still get advanced? How can you get advanced? So you have a clock. You may not have a clock. You may work for an institution, that has multiple paths. It's very important to read those guidelines ahead of time when you're taking the job. We all give them to you, maybe you don't, but the things institutions could do as well is look at those pathways and say, okay, why does it all have to be on you? How much of this could we automate? How much of this could we drive externally? What's the utility of saying, yes, I need you to remember to get your education, your teaching peer evaluated twice a year in years 1 and 3. Why don't we automate that? Why don't we automate that? Why don't we put senior faculty members, the older physicians, this is a great job for a more senior ally in a department to take on and say, okay, I'm going to make a schedule, and then let me come to you and say, hey, you're on the schedule to teach these 3 times. Do you want to be evaluated? Are these good for you? How much of that can we do? Then can we look using our data from the pandemic to say, how much of this traditionally biases against women in URMs? So our guidelines at our institution do not recognize or know what to do with something like a podcast nationally. And we could deliver a podcast, a high-quality podcast, and have a readership, an audience that is 10 times what we have right in here today. But this is what our institution values. So you need to know that. This is what our institution values. But our institution needs to ask that question, should we value only this? How do we look out for that? How do we account virtually? One of the things the chairs group is beginning to tackle this week is how could we create a speakers bureau to take our own junior faculty and push them to you? Because an external presentation is valued, right? Presenting at another institution is valued. I need grand rounds filled at my institution. You need grand rounds filled at yours. All our junior faculty need to do this thing. Why are we burdening them with finding that? Why don't we do it as a network and send it out? So when you think about things that we could do, that's one thing we could do. The individual guidelines at the institution are a real challenge to change. They're a real challenge to change, and they take a much larger audience. They would take, in our institution, a very large group of allies that are kind of in a venerable stage in their career to say, yeah, we're going to take this on with you, we'll go with you, and we'll engage that. But I think if you're looking at things that a department could do and an institution could do, what can we automate? What can we take off the plate would be a lot of that. Yeah.
I don't know any of you in the audience with the exception of my one medical student. Thanks, Erica, for coming. So I'm going to go really out on a limb here, and I feel a little vulnerable doing it. But your question was, what policies can we put in place? And I will tell you this past year and for the next few years, we are going to be hiring like mad in a very red state, in a little blue dot in the red state, much like Austin, the blueberry and the tomato soup. Policies that affect women's health when it comes to employment are going to be critical to my success at recruiting and retaining faculty and residents. So I think that's something that, depending on kind of what level you're at, you may have some influence over, you may not. But I think that that's something that has been on my mind a lot lately.
I think the other important thing is, maybe it's like guidelines or processes or policies. To have all those are important, but to make sure that the processes are fair in terms of hiring, and also when you're like interviewing or evaluating people, a lot of committees, recruitment committees have diversity officers now. And I think to also like intentionally look at your data. So one of the things that we're doing at Northwell now, a lot of DE&I committees have sprouted up, which is wonderful. And, we're proud that ours, has been there since before the pandemic. And our emergency medicine service line was really supportive to the point where that now there's like 8 subcommittees. And as, part of our goals, what we're looking at, and so probably similar for all of you, when you look at your staff, I don't know what the gender and cultural and race and ethnic makeup is of my staff unless like I ask them, because it's privileged confidential information, which is interesting, right? Because then how do you sort of improve like the diversity of your staff if you don't know your numbers? But the HR people will give us the aggregate data. So that's one of our goals, is that every year we get the aggregate data for the 18 emergency departments in our service line, so that we know, how many men, how many women are there, does the race and ethnicity makeup of our department reflect our patient population? And I know at LIJ for a fact that there is a disparity and we have work to do. So I think you have to be, obviously you're not going to like hire just based upon what somebody's race is or what somebody's gender is, but you want to be cognizant of what the diversity of your staff is, and put in processes to improve the diversity if you don't have the diversity there.
With that, our time is actually up, and so I do want to put in the plug for just the diversity and recruitment and how instrumental I think that is, because I will tell you, as a resident, there were 2 female faculty in my department. Neither one of them were people that I went to when I was pregnant about how to navigate being a parent. It was the men who were married to other physicians who helped me navigate that and deal with some of the guilt that I had about working with the newborn at home. And so, but I think the more diverse your faculty is, the easier it is to find your people within that. And so I want to thank you all for coming today. For hopefully folks will mill about for just a little bit after this, but it really just thank you for the sponsorship. The allyship is really critical as part of this, and then remembering how to help those who come behind you will be incredibly important as well. So thank you all for joining us, and we appreciate you coming. Thank you.